There is a looming operation about to be taken into account in the Middle East by Israel into the area of Rafah in the Gaza Strip that is almost certainly going to shoot up the casualty count among the Palestinian people here. It is something that's been talked about a lot lately, both by the Israeli government, the U.S. government, and certainly by those in the region. And there's lots of conflict and contradictions between what the U.S. and Israel are saying. But according to Netanyahu, that day of reckoning is going to arrive very soon. And the decision, he says, has already been made. So now it's a matter of waiting to find out what's going to happen. And can the U.S. do anything to either alleviate the suffering or even possibly to forestall that? Now, we're going to talk in some detail about those things here in just a minute. But before I do, I want to talk about some breaking news that's happening, because here at Deep Dive, we always want to give you the latest information on things that are happening of significance around the world right now. And this one here is because it directly relates to this subject, actually. Israel has attacked into the Damascus, the capital of Syria, and destroyed a portion of the consulate of Iran in the capital city. And we're starting to get reports already that allegedly up to 5 people have been killed already. And the target appears to have been a General Mohammad Reza Zahedi, who was an IRGC commander for Iran, for the Iranian regime, the IRGC, their main army, and for other people as well. The Iranian ambassador declares that there is going to be a severe retaliation in response for this. These situations is continuing to unfold. I mean, these views you're seeing here were released just not long ago, because this just happened within the last hour or two, I believe, is when it was finally initially shot off. But we need to understand this is not a one-off kind of deal by Israel. And this has been very unusual for a couple of reasons. Number one, Israel rarely fires missiles in the daylight. So that by itself is very unusual. They usually do these things at night when casualties are going to be lower, air defenses will have a harder time, et cetera. But for some reason, they chose to do this kind of out front in your face. And they launched a big one here. More to the point, as far as I can track and looking back, this is the first time Israel has destroyed an embassy, an actual consulate of a foreign government, especially of Iran, which is primarily their target. This marks a new escalation, because this is going to have potentially diplomatic ramifications. Israel is already suffering a great deal from their public prestige around the world, and especially in the Western world. And this is not going to do anything to help that, because attacking a diplomatic building, of course, has always been viewed as sort of sacrosanct, that you don't hit somebody's embassy anywhere. I mean, that's just something that is just not done in the modern world by anyone, even by our enemies of the United States or of the West. The embassies have been left alone, and for good reason. That's the way you want it. You want your embassies to be able to be existing even in hostile territory, because that's the only means by which you can negotiate and have any discussions or conversations, any of that kind of thing. And Israel now has crossed that line. Additionally, this is coming just days after, on March 29th, when Israel attacked in some Syrian military in Aleppo, in which 40 people or more than 40 people were killed, most of which were Syrian soldiers. So that's already starting to ramp up situation, because apparently there was some IRGC folks there as well. So Israel is not content to just take care of what's going on in the Gaza Strip. They also are expanding it into, as you know, probably from what we've talked about in this past, there's routine interaction between northern Israel and southern Lebanon, between the Hezbollah and the Israeli forces. And that's been going on for quite some time. And periodically there's spikes in that. And there's actually some concern that Israel may choose to attack into Lebanon to push them back to the Litani River, which is about 25 kilometers, I believe, into Lebanon, to basically take them out of rocket range of the Israeli settlements. Because as you may also know, or maybe don't, there's over 100,000 Israelis who have been evacuated since October of last year from that strip, because it's too dangerous for them to be in there with all the rocket fire. And the Israeli government comes under a lot of pressure from those people to do whatever it takes so that they can actually go back to their homes instead of just living as refugees somewhere in Israel. Those are a lot of the things that are going on here. And all this is tied together. And this issue with Rafah is really front and center. So let me turn my attention back to the subject of today's deep dive. But we're going to come back to this because you're going to see how it's really all tied together. Now, first of all, there's been lots of debate here in the United States, in Congress, at the administration level, and especially between the U.S. government and the Israeli government on what's going on. There's about 1.2 million people in Rafah right now, a city that was designed for about 250,000. So 4 times the normal population, almost 5 times actually, have been squashed into this area. It's just not designed to hold that many people. And of course, they're all there because they were forced to evacuate from other parts of the Gaza Strip and told to reposition there. Well, now Netanyahu claims that there are 4 battalions of Hamas mixed into that mess, and he wants to destroy those final 4 battalions. That's the way he's phrasing it, the final 4 battalions. He wants to finish this job and get it done. Now, the question is, where are those people going to go? Because Netanyahu continues to claim he has a plan, but no one's seen it. U.S. government officials frequently say they've not seen any plan to do this and where they're going to go. And if you just look at a map of the area and you know anything at all about the amount of destruction that's already happened throughout the Gaza Strip, it's not clear where they could actually go to be seen or to live and to not be destroyed or even be able to survive aside from that. Now, last week, there was a vote at the United Nations Security Council to call in for an immediate ceasefire to stop some of the killing, to give a chance for aid to get into these people, because the entire population, according to our Secretary of State, is now dependent upon external food coming in, relief supplies, and they're on the verge of being in the starvation category, where people in large numbers may start dying of starvation and thirst if that happens. So the UNSC, with the abstention of the United States, voted to demand an immediate ceasefire, at least through Ramadan, to try and get hostages back and to get food to the people of Israel there. I mean, to the people of Gaza. Now, that's put the U.S. in an odd position because they are doing one thing at the same time they're doing what seems to be the very opposite of that, and it's being noticed by people around the world. First of all, here's what our ambassador said before she abstained on the vote.
Colleagues, today this council spoke out in support of the ongoing diplomatic efforts led by the United States, Qatar, Egypt, to bring about an immediate and sustainable ceasefire, secure the immediate release of all hostages, and help alleviate the tremendous suffering of Palestinian civilians in Gaza who are in dire need of protection and life-saving humanitarian assistance. The United States fully supports these critical objectives.
Well, we don't fully support it because then we abstained. We didn't vote for it because presumably, or allegedly rather, it had some provisions and some word choices that we didn't like, but that's all nonsense because it doesn't mean anything anyway. Ironically, you had John Kirby after this vote say that it was non-binding, even though that's completely inaccurate. I mean, anyone who knows anything about the UN knows that there is the UN Security Council and there's the UN General Assembly, the UNGA. So UNGA resolutions are non-binding, and they have always been that for. It's sort of like the sense of the Senate. You may have heard some of those in the U.S. Congress. But the UNSC, the Security Council, they are by definition binding. So even when it was passed, we consider it non-binding. And of course, that means that if we like something, it's binding. And if we don't like it, we just ignore it and just claim it's not binding. It's like you violate a law and you say it's not a law. It's just not, because we say it's not binding. It's just an idea. It's a suggestion. And of course, it's so ironic, if not perverse, that we so often in this country love to brag about the rules-based international order, this order that we set up after World War II to bring stability to the world and prosperity for the people. And we constantly point fingers at Russia and China, North Korea and Iran especially, and say, you guys are not following the rules-based order. Then when the very based order that we helped establish at the United Nations Security Council, when something happens we don't like, we just say it's not binding. And I assure you, people around the world are paying attention to these kinds of things, and this will not work out well for us. This is not just like here, well, we shouldn't do that. We shouldn't. But there are consequences for this. We're going to touch on that a little bit later here. But even with that issue, while on the one hand talking about how we stand in solidarity with the Palestinian people, we are in full agreement that the hostages need to come back, and we are totally committed to helping the Palestinian people, we also are doing this.
President Biden greenlighting billions of dollars worth of weapons for Israel. That's despite tension between the White House and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu over a military offensive in southern Gaza. Now,
so while Netanyahu is talking about going into Rafah, and while we keep saying it's a problem and we don't support it, we're supporting it. What are we thinking? We say with one side of our mouth that we care about the Palestinian people. We say out of that same side of the mouth that we don't support going into Rafah because we know that there's no good path to send people out there to protect them. But then on the other side, we give billions of dollars more to Israel. And that includes some of the biggest bombs in our inventory, 2,000 pounders, some of them, which is enough to wipe out entire portions of city blocks. Now, that's obviously not kind of, any kind of targeted operation. That is an area weapon which wipes out anything within a blast radius. So we're saying the opposite thing at the same time. And again, folks, people are paying attention to this. And in fact, Sky News actually had talked to one of their routine experts over there who observed this dichotomy.
Well, there's a slight irony here at the moment because the UN Security Council resolution was designed to bring the war to an end. It was enabled, although it was US abstention, but it was enabled by the US. Yet here they are apparently helping the IDF come up with a plan to restart the war. Now, there is widespread recognition that Hamas's tenure in power in Gaza is probably going to come to an end. But if there was a military offensive into Rafah, it would be a very, very difficult. We're seeing just parts of it now. These are fairly old pictures. The situation's got much worse now. And imagine trying to conduct a military operation through this sort of, with 1.3 million in the confines, and whether it's IDF enabled, enacted, or American enabled, it would still be incredibly dangerous. And of course, there is a grave risk with the US intervening like this, that it could get embroiled or even become complicit in a mass casualty event. Very, very interesting intervention by the US.
Yeah, very interesting. He puts a fine diplomatic note on it, but that means that thousands more people could be killed if the Rafah operation comes off, or if they aren't literally allowed to go somewhere else, and if there's someplace actually is found. More on that in a second too. I've got some details on that, which shows how really problematic this is going to be. But there are some in the United States, and this is not going to come as a surprise to anyone who pays any attention at all. David Petraeus thinks this is a good idea.
You don't send the fire department to put out 70 or 80% of the blaze. You need to take it all out.
So do you think they should go into Rafah?
I do think they have to, but you have to do it the right way. They have to destroy Hamas, but how you do that, and this is what I believe the U.S. administration is voicing concerns about, to show us the plan for how you're going to move 1.1 million displaced people to another area in Gaza, because they're obviously not going to leave Gaza, and then to isolate that battlefield.
Now, the vice president also was wondering that same issue of how you're going to move these people around and where you're going to move them to, how you're going to feed them, because as she put it, I'm looking at a map and I just don't see it.
We have been clear in multiple conversations and in every way that any major military operation in Rafah would be a huge mistake. Let me tell you something. I have studied the maps. There's nowhere for those folks to go. And we're looking at about 1.5 million people in Rafah who are there because they were told to go there, most of them. And so we've been very clear that it would be a mistake to move into Rafah with any type of military operation.
A mistake, but would there be consequences if he does move forward?
Well, we're going to take it one step at a time, but we've been very clear in terms of our perspective on whether or not that should happen.
Are you ruling out that there would be consequences from the United States?
I am ruling out nothing.
That's, I am ruling out nothing. So you have been very clear. I'm so tired of hearing that phrase. Very clear what we want to happen. And then when given a softball opportunity to say, and if you don't do what we want to happen with our stuff, there's going to be consequences. So instead, she basically says no consequences. You may have seen on a show we did a couple of weeks back, 2 or 3 weeks ago, I think, on this topic, where Biden at one point said that going into Rafah is going to be a red line. And then when asked on MSNBC the next day, he said, well, there's no real red line that we're going to stop giving them stuff. And you see with this tranche given on the 31st, just yesterday, announced where we're giving them billions of dollars of additional weapons and aircraft. So obviously there is no red line. So even though the vice president says it's that, there are serious consequences or there could be serious consequences, we don't want them to go to Rafah. I don't see where they can send the people. We do care about them from our UN ambassador. When the bottom line comes to it, here's more bombs. Here's more airplanes. Here's more attack aircraft so you can continue to bomb. Now, what do you think that Benjamin Netanyahu's thinking in his mind? When he hears those words, but he sees these actions, and then he hears the vice president say, I'm not ruling out consequences. I mean, if he doesn't do anything besides laugh, I would be shocked. Or just looks with contempt on our leadership that they're going to do whatever they're told. So I fully expect that that's going to happen here, that they're going to go into Rafah because that's what they want to do. They want to, quote, finish the job and get these, what Netanyahu calls 4 additional battalions outside of there. But the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Brown, recently went to Israel to share some of the views of some alternative ways that they could do it, because we want to say, okay, we get it. You got to go in there because you have to defeat the Hamas. You got to get the bad guys, but you got to do it right. But you heard Petraeus say that it matters how you do that. And so what are some of those ways? Now, Israel has just, to give you an idea what they're going to be doing based on what they have done so far. And after we have sent all these advisors, and we've been doing this for weeks now, this is not anything just in the last few days. It's been going on for quite a number of times now where we're giving advice on how to conduct it. Now, a friend of mine, Rajan Menon, who's been on this show before, tweeted out a very interesting fact that when the U.S. Enabled the Syrian Democratic Forces to retake Rafah, a very large city, from ISIS control between 2016 and 2017, there was an average of 1.7, so just under 2 civilians killed for every 100 airstrikes that we launched to try to take that back. So those were relatively targeted. Now, any civilians are, the loss of civilians is a tragedy, especially to their families. It doesn't matter whether it's 1 or 1,000,001. Every family cares. But that was the number. Less than 2 per 100 strikes. The number in Gaza so far, 54. So 54 civilians are killed for every 100 airstrikes so far, as opposed to 2. So 2 is what right looks like. If you're really trying hard, and I can validate that we did try hard from my personal observation and my personal knowledge about operations that we have done in the Middle East and Iraq and Afghanistan, we really do try to prevent civilian casualties. We actually try to help the civilian population to get rid of the terrorist operatives in that area. 2 per 100. 54 per 100 is not even trying. And that's just the facts. That's the reality on the ground. Now, there was just an operation here concluded yesterday, about a 2-week operation back again in the northern part of Gaza, which hadn't gotten a lot of focus because everybody's looking in the southern part on the Rafah. But not everybody wasn't looking. There have been some. And in the Al-Shifa hospital, Israel claimed that it was again being used as an operation from which some of the Hamas fighters were fighting. And so they had an operation there to clear this out. And at the end of this operation, the hospital was completely destroyed. I mean, wiped out. It's a husk of a building now. There's nothing left but really the skeleton of a building. The rooms have been wiped out. All the medical equipment has been destroyed. Even stairwells within the building were destroyed. So that the building is completely useless. Dozens of bodies were found inside of there. Many of the patients that were there have been killed or were killed in the process. According to some reports, hundreds of bodies were just left strewn around the complex, and all of the buildings of the hospital complex are destroyed beyond repair. So there is literally no possibility that any health care can be given by that situation. Now, into that, let me pull something up here real quick. This is what Israel said, I believe today. Let me look at the date on this for a second. Is this today? Yes, this is today. So this is April 1st. And the Israelis described the situation like this. Overall, this seems to still be a slow, I'm sorry, correction. Part of this was an operation or an observation. No, I'm sorry. I'm looking at something I need to read a little later. Forgive me for that. Gary, if you could put that call up out there with that I had put with yeah, that's the one where there's no life left here. And then part of that reporting says Israel's military has described the raid as one of the most successful operations of the war in Gaza, which has now run for nearly 6 months. The army also insisted the raid of the hospital had been conducted, quote, while preventing harm to civilians, patients, and medical teams, end of quote. And yet no truth to that whatsoever. There is no truth to that. You saw those images Gary was showing there. That's what, quote, taking care of everybody looks like. Making the building completely, look at that. Look at that video right there. And just tell me that those words that I just said have any bearing relation to reality. Zero. None whatsoever. And yet that's what Israel is claiming to the world that it looks like when they're trying to preserve that. So when now then Israel tells you that they're getting ready to go into Rafah and they're going to take care of it and they're going to take care of the people, why would we expect anything different than that? And you see, that's the reason why the United States, at least verbally, says that we don't support this, because we know that because there is such a compressed amount of humanity in that extremely small area, any operation that goes in there will have enormous casualties because there isn't anywhere else to go. The vice president was right on that. And you can see in her body language, she actually meant that when she said it, because it's true. But then when you ask the obvious, logical next question, what are you going to do about it? Then basically nothing. I want to look here because, as I said a minute ago, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff just went down there and gave some ideas on how things could go better. And Israel claims they're going to listen to it, but then they're going to go and do it what they want anyway. Here's some of the big problems with this. There are some questions that have to be answered by Israel for Israelis, not for me, not for the United States, anybody else, but even on their own, that I don't think that they're actually thinking through, or they don't care. I'm not sure which it is. But there are no rational answers for this, because the answers are crucial if Israel wants to have a positive outcome. It's always important to have a vision before you start of what your end state is going to be. You have to know what you want to produce with armed forces and military power, so that the end state that you create is better than the beginning state that caused you to think you need to use military power. It stands to reason. It's kind of logical. If you have a position and a situation here that's chaotic, that you have deemed to be a threat to your security, or something that's going to be put at risk your national security, then, and you want to use military force, then you have to be able to say, okay, well, I want the end state at the end of this to be better than it was before I went in, right? I mean, doesn't it seem kind of standard logical? It's almost embarrassing to say out loud, because, well, obviously you're not going to want to use military power if you're going to make the situation even worse at the end. or are they? That's the problem. Here's a couple of questions that people need to ask about. When the IDF, whatever they choose to do, whatever path they plan on going here, how are they going to identify Hamas? You've heard Netanyahu say on this station many times here that there are about 4 battalions of Hamas in the Rafah area that he wants to go and finally destroy. How's he going to do that? How does he know who is a Hamas fighter and who's just a man in Gaza? Look, there are, like I said, 1 million people in the Rafah area right now, and some large percentage of those are men. Most of them are a lot of them are going to be military age, probably several 100,000 by some counts I've seen. That's probably a pretty conservative and reasonable number when you're talking about that population. Probably about 300,000 of those are men who could perform military tasks. At the beginning of the war, the allegation was that the total Hamas fighters power was somewhere between 30 and 40,000. And obviously after 5 months of war, and even by Israeli claims, they're down to only 25% of their pre-war strength. So 10, 12,000 maybe left from what they started. But there's probably 300,000 men in the Rafah area down there, especially in the southern part. So when Israel goes in there, how are they going to know? They're going to point a gun and they see a man. Is he a Hamas or is he one of the innocent civilians? How would they know? That is so crucial. When you're talking about going in and taking out Hamas battalions, you have to know who's Hamas. Otherwise, how would you ever know whether you got the battalions or not? I mean, that stands to reason. There's no answer. Israel has no answer. It doesn't appear that Israel's even looking for an answer because I don't think they care. Now, again, folks, as I say all the time, we're unintimidated and uncompromised on this channel. We're going to tell you the ground truth reality. This is ground truth reality that's unpleasant to contemplate by many, but we have to face it. Israel's actions belie what their words are grotesquely, as the ones I just read. But now then here that I'm telling you operationally what's necessary to conduct a military operation of this kind is you have to be able to identify your enemy. And right now, there is no way for Israel to identify their enemy. So that's number one, their main problem. And then, of course, even aside from that, how are they going to know when they have captured or killed that many troops? How will they even know if they ever succeed? There's no criteria by which I'm aware of that you could even aspire to even hope that, well, here's once this happens, then we'll know. So there's no answer for that one either. And then even more fundamental, how will they prevent Hamas men from joining some of the hundreds of thousands of others if they actually do provide a location, a physical location for the civilians to leave? How are they going to know when they see this stream of men, hundreds of thousands of them rolling out with their families? Is that a Hamas? Is that a genuine innocent Palestinian man trying to take care of his family? How are they going to know? And that what do you think the chances are from the Hamas's perspective that they see the IDF closing in, that they're going to let all the Palestinian people leave and that they're going to stay there now knowing that they're all the targets until the IDF closes in and wipes out every man left? What do you think the chances are that they would do that as opposed to putting down their guns, putting on whatever same kind of clothes that everybody else is wearing and just filter out with everybody else? Do you think that there's some sort of clearinghouse where the IDF is going to be checking ID cards of people that come through there and be able to screen everybody to know whether they're Hamas or not? There's no way to do that. They don't have the manpower to do that. So whenever they find this place, you're going to see the videos like we did earlier in this war of just stream thousands of people moving out of one area into another. There's not going to be any check in that. So Netanyahu can never say whether there's going to be any people there. And you see where this is going. There's a number of other things I could read here. But then on top of all of this, even after Israel goes in and does whatever it's actually going to do, and they take, they so-called clear out Rafah area, and Netanyahu will then claim victory by whatever criteria he pulls out of thin air, because it won't be based on reality, but he'll do that. Then what's going to happen next? Is Israel going to be safe? This is what I've been harping on from the beginning of this war. Then what? If you had this chaos on October 7th that military force was supposed to correct, what is going to be the end state? Now, they should have identified this. They didn't, but now I'm going to do it for them. I'll tell you what the end state's going to be. The end state's going to be more chaos. It's going to be more violence, and it's going to be laying the seeds, not just within the Gaza Strip, not just within the West Bank, for where their fellow Palestinians live, but in the region and all around. We're going to talk about that in just a second. But just as a means of explanation, in 2005, 2007, the U.S. conducted that surge in Iraq because the U.S. were suffering this terrible high casualty rate from the insurgency that was going on in Iraq. And we brought in the big surge, which Petraeus actually led and was part of. And, we succeeded in that. We knocked down al-Qaeda and brought a lot more stability to it. So on the surface, it looked like, well, that's how you do it right, what Petraeus did. Here's the problem. Petraeus didn't come in with some plan. Petraeus came in and saw something happening on the ground beyond our control that was moving in a good direction and supported it. And that was that the Sunni population of the insurgency, of the Iraqi insurgency, and the Sunni al-Qaeda group on the ground, so both the same religion, were killing each other because the al-Qaeda group wanted to basically take over the insurgency and make it an international terrorist organization. But the Sunnis in Iraq didn't want that. They just wanted to get rid of the occupation. So they resisted. They would not join al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda then turned on them and literally started killing them. So the Sunni insurgents were being killed by Shia. They were being killed by al-Qaeda, and they were being killed by the U.S. coalition. And they viewed an existential threat. They said, we're all going to die if we don't do something different. So they came up with a plan to say, hey, Americans, we'll work with you together to go after al-Qaeda, which you don't like and we don't like. It's an enemy of my enemy sort of thing. So they worked to that. And Petraeus said, that's a great idea. We're willing to do that. And it turns into the Sons of Iraq program. Turns out to be really successful. We completely vanquish al-Qaeda in Iraq. They called them AQI. And then brought relative stability long enough for us to withdraw our troops. That was all because al-Qaeda in Iraq overplayed its hand. But here's the thing that I want to point out. Al-Qaeda in Iraq was damaged. They weren't destroyed. We killed al-Zarqawi, their leader. We went together with the local Iraqis and just decimated the organization, driving them out of most of the built-up areas out into the wilderness. That's not the end of the story, though, was it? Because from 2007, when they were effectively demolished, al-Qaeda in Iraq, they reformed into ISIS. And so by 2011, they have rebuilt enough strength. And now all of a sudden they started actually taking territory. And then in 2014, they took cities in both Iraq and in Syria. And we've talked about a lot of that happening here. That's what's going to happen here. Al-Qaeda in Iraq, Al-Qaeda morphed into Al-Qaeda in Iraq. Al-Qaeda in Iraq morphed into ISIS. ISIS is now in the process of morphing into something else. And their ISIS-K is the current iteration, which allegedly had that Moscow terror attack and did have a terror attack in Iran in January of this year. Folks, the anger and the hatred that led to the formation of Al-Qaeda originally just changes from time to time. When you destroy part of it, it just reforms into something else because the conditions still exist that caused its origin in the first place. That is going to be on steroids here in this case, because after Netanyahu claims to have destroyed Hamas, maybe he will. As an organization, he probably will. These guys will fold into this population because they're indistinguishable. Nobody can tell who's who. And so unless Israel goes on a literal pogrom and wipes out everyone and kills all the people, and I used to think that was just an eye-rolling kind of hyperbole. Now, all of a sudden, I have to give a little bit of possibility. Is that what they're thinking about doing? I don't know. I can't authoritatively say no because of all these things they have done and are continuing to do. But let's, for the moment, say they're not going to do that. That international pressure, even American support, has limits, that we would never support something like that. Let's say that that's the case. What do you think is going to happen? Is Israel going to find peace and security? that Netanyahu has promised his whole population. Do we do this? We're going to get security. What do you think is going to happen? Well, now we had Ambassador Chaz Freeman on our channel not long ago, where I asked him this in a related question, and notice some of the things that he says here, especially this was about 3 weeks ago, in light of things that are happening right now and have just happened. Look how prescient this warning may be.
A whole new generation of Palestinians, many of them in foreign lands, not in Palestine, now has the hatred required to go after Israel and its supporters. And there is a real danger. There are two dangers here. One is, of course, that the war will expand further in the Middle East. It's already involved Yemen. It's involved assassinations by us in violation of Iraqi sovereignty, and it could well spread to Iran. It could go north into Lebanon,
right?
And but aside from that, it could become worldwide. We could be back to the mid-'60s with Palestinian terrorists knocking off supporters of Israel who aren't Israelis, who are maybe Jewish or maybe Christian evangelicals who support Israel. This is an entirely reasonable possibility, and it's scary, I think.
It is scary. It is anguishing to watch when this war could be brought to an end. If President Biden cared anything about the people of Palestine, if President Biden cared anything about the American people, about our troops that are in Iraq and Syria to this day, if he cared anything about the people in Israel, the Jewish population, if he cared anything about any of them, he would cut off all of our supplies immediately and say no more military support for Israel until you seek some kind of negotiated settlement, some kind of extended ceasefire, unconditional, that we then will try and talk about some kind of negotiated settlement. Because I am telling you, as authoritative as I can, I have seen this play out personally, and I have read about it throughout lots of study throughout this region and other places. If you don't have an end state to where the people of Palestine have a reason to hope for a better future, and the people of Israel have peace and a reason to hope for a better future, no one is going to have hope for a better future at all. Not Palestine, not Israel, not America. What Ambassador Freeman there said, it still haunts me, because this could literally blow up into a regional issue, a regional war. And we just saw that Israel has now targeted Syrian military. He's targeted Iranian embassy personnel in Syria. I mean, they're doing everything they can to expand this war. And so far, it's only the restraint. Check this out. Consider how weird this sounds to coming out of my mouth. Restraint by Syria and Iran has prevented this from escalating into a bigger war so far. How long do we count on them doing what's in the best interest of us by not expanding this war and being sucked into a regional conflagration? That's crazy that we have to rely on that. We should not rely on anything that comes out of Tehran or Damascus. We should rely on our power and our moral authority to bring this war to an end. Now, I know that just rankles some people, but listen to me, listen carefully. You may want Israel to finish the job, like some others have said, but there is no finishing the job. There is only putting more fuel on a regional fire that could blow up in our faces. The longer we go taking this course of action and just submitting to whatever Benjamin Netanyahu says, the greater the risk that we get sucked into a war and that the Israeli people become victims of even more violence than they were before October 7th. That is the harsh truth. And I've laid it out here for you to see. It's as plain as can be. And it is time for something to be done differently. And I hope and I pray that whether it's from people like you who are watching this, who are sending notes to your congressman, whether you're tagging this video onto what's some of these claims, these crazy claims that some of these people make that like Petraeus that we should go on, or Ben Hodges, or some of these other people, or anyone in the administration who's wavering on these things. Tag them with this video, which has all the hard truth about what's necessary for our national security. I just pray that we get to that day that we don't have to come back here and talk about in the future when a larger war has broken out, and showing scenes like Ambassador Freeman where he warned about this stuff when we still had a chance to do it. Right now, we do. And I hope and pray that's the way it's going to work out. Well, folks, we're going to remain unintimidated and uncompromised for you. And we are going to stay on top of this situation in Iran, about what's going on here in Rafah. You can count on Daniel Davis Deep Dive to keep giving you the true, honest information that you need to know. Thanks, and we'll see you on the next episode of Deep Dive.